Good good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. Good to be with you this morning. A few people move forward. The rest of you are like, no, make me, Tom. It's good to be together this morning. My name is Jay, if I've not met you, and I'm excited to continue in our series that we have called Where Do They All Go?, where we're taking time to look at where all of the disciples who, again, become the apostles, like, where do they go? What happens after Pentecost? A lot of them aren't mentioned again after Pentecost, so part of what we're having to do is look at some of what ancient church documents say about where they ended up and what they did. But we're also taking time to look at sort of their temperament as different disciples that were chosen by Jesus, because they are very different types of people. And hopefully, in studying the different types of people, we realize that the kinds of people that follow Jesus, the folks that end up in a life with God, have a very diverse set of personalities and profiles that, unlike many other sociological groups that sort of follow the same kind of trend lines of like the same kinds of people, for example, are accountants or car salesmen. Okay, all right, that one scratched an itch. Similar temperaments or styles of behavior. When we look at the different disciples and who become apostles, they are really dissimilar. They follow all kinds of different kind of trend lines by way of temperament and the way we understand them from the scriptures and from the early church, which means every person in here can be a follower of Jesus. Exactly how you have been made and designed. You don't have to have your personality change, but there will also be ways for you to grow, to learn to take risks or to learn to be restrained. So, for example, we looked at Peter. Does anybody remember what makes Peter interesting by way of temperament or style of relating? He's insane, effectively, right? The thing we talked about with Peter is that he learns what he's thinking by talking. And do you know anyone like that? You can point at them right now. Everyone, 1, 2, 3, point at that person. People are pointing at their spouses. Okay, yeah, right. Some are pointing themselves. That's me. People that like talk just instantly without even like thinking about what they're saying, and they learn what they think. And then we've looked at someone like Andrew, who's very, very different. He's throughout almost all the stories of the Gospels and throughout church history, he's focused on one or two people at a time. He's super, super intentional. Those are almost all of the stories that we see of Andrew. And so, we've been looking at all these different folks, and hopefully you're starting to see yourself in some of these people. Today we'll look at a disciple that, again, most people have not really thought about very much. We have a little bit from the scriptures, which we'll look at. But then we have also some really interesting stories from church history related to this specific apostle, and that's Philip. So just in your mind, those of you who've been raised in church, think of everything you know about Philip right now. Okay, you're out of stuff. Okay, so you did it all real fast, didn't you? Okay, so most people are like, I don't know, there's not a lot to say. Well, there's 3 key stories that we'll look at very briefly. But what we'll notice by way of sort of studying Philip is Philip, of all of the disciples, and what we learn about him even from church history, was very, very, very practical. Philip is the guy that lines up the way that things work. He thinks about how they work in order. He has a plan. He knows how things are going to go. My hunch is he had a detailed calendar. Maybe even he had sort of an engineering mind. Anyone here have an engineering mind? Like you can see how A leads to B, which leads to C, which leads to D, and you line all that up ahead of time, and you can see it all happening, and you just can think very practically from one thing to the next. And again, this might not be everybody here, or you might be thinking about somebody when I say this. You're thinking about your one friend, or your cousin, or your brother, your sister, maybe your spouse. But there's a few of you that are like, yeah, that's me. That's how my mind works. I see things in order. And again, being this kind of person, a very practical person, very down-to-earth person, someone who aligns everything, is, a way of thinking and behaving in the world, but it's more than that. It sort of fits into your whole experience of the world, even how your temperament works. My wife, Danielle, is way more practical than me. She's way more planned and thoughtful in pretty much every way. I studied philosophy. Numbers are ideas for me. What is a number? That kind of thing. Whereas she's very, very practical, very focused, very present in the world. So we realized this a few years into being married. And she's so present in the world that literally any time I can stop her and say, what time is it right now? So we maybe haven't looked at a clock or a watch or anything, and I can just say, what time is it right now? Now, we may have been going through the whole day. By way of comparison for me, if we've been doing stuff together throughout the day, and maybe I've been doing some chores, and I did some email, and I did something else, and I've just kind of been on my own, I will not be able to guess what time it is within 4 hours. Like, it could be 11, it could be 5 p.m. I just don't know. I'm not aligning things and present in that way in the world. I might even be able to recount every part of a conversation we had. I might even tell you what I think about what I experienced throughout the day in great detail. I have no idea what's going on ever. I was always the worst at recounting a story. Like, how old were you when that happened? Oh, 9 to 14. Somewhere in that range. I couldn't drive yet. That's all I know. I can stop Danielle at any point, at any day, and just say, what time is it right now? She's like, I'm not entirely sure. I'm like, what time is it right now? She's like, she thinks for a second, she goes, 9:24. I'm like, it's 9:24. It's like a magical power. Some of you right now were like, that's not magical, Jay. This talk is for you. Okay, so, because it kind of is. Like, people have different ways that they experience the world. And frankly, when you think about your faith in Jesus, and we'll see with Philip, when you see the world that practically or that in that way that's aligned in that way, there's components of the faith that we have with Jesus that can be really challenging. It can be really challenging to not feel like you can be in control of every element. Or you need adequate time in order to align exactly how something works so that you can trust God. But let's be really clear, really clear. Practical people do in fact run the world. You do not want me, well, frankly, doing most things. I was about to list some things. It'd be easier to list the things you actually do want me to do than the things you don't want me to do. We need practical people who fly planes and plan roads and manage finances. We need people, and all of us to some degree have to learn these skills if we want to be adults in the world. But often when it comes to faith, people who see the world in this way really struggle, maybe even to come to belief. How can I trust in a God that I cannot see? How do I make sense of a God that might love me? How would I even know that? What are some ways what are some things that I need to do in relationship to that? Or even if you have come into a life of faith, how do I trust God with my money, with this relationship, with this health problem? So I've studied everything that I can possibly know about this one health problem, and you're asking me to pray. Why would I pray when there actually are things to be done? Should we end the sermon here? So right now we're like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. That's me. Or others, you're like, no, I know that person. Well, let's look at Philip, because one of the things we can see from church history is Philip leads an extraordinary life, does a lot of really interesting things. Philip, again, if you don't remember from other talks, he was one of the first disciples, and what he was good at was bringing people to Jesus. So we see him show up in John chapter 1. I actually have one funny verse as it relates to him, because it relates to Nathanael, which I think we talked about last week. He's willing, he's ready to go. So it says, the next day Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael, told him, "We found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and of whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." This is my favorite. "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" Nathanael asked. "Come and see," said Philip. Do you see just the practicality of it? I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to describe the philosophies of how you're being ethnocentric and rude. Effectively, I'm about to offend some of you in the room, but this would be a coastal elite saying, "Can anything good come from the Appalachian Mountains?" That would be Nazareth, right? The people of Galilee spoke with a twang. They were the kind of people didn't like hanging out with if you were of the intelligence caste of that culture, which today would be the coastal elites, which now inhabit Denver. What? Can anything good come from, Memphis, Tennessee? Right, Annabeth? Okay, so that's our worship pastors. Anyway, okay. But Philip just practically says, "Well, just come and see." But so there's a strength to his practicality. Hey, just come do the next thing, and I bet you're going to find out. But we see that his practical mind does limit his faith. We don't have time to look at all these stories, but we've looked at some of them before in other places. So I'm just going to refer to them, and you can spend more time with them this week. But John chapter 6 is the feeding of the 5,000. Philip is the one who speaks up and says that we have a budget problem. We have a financial problem in relationship to this miracle. Just think about that phrase. We have a budget problem in relationship to the miracle. So John chapter 6. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That's the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountain and sat with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw the great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Pretty good question. He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he's going to do. Philip answered, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each to have a bite." P.S. I find this pretty impressive that he can calculate that quickly. So again, we're seeing the sort of practical nature of Philip's mind. He's like, I'll carry the one. A bite would be 2 ounces. How many bit of fish in the bread? Half a year's wages for 1 bite. What do you say? So he sees the world in this way. That's how he understands the way that the world works. We calculate things. We make decisions. Jesus, what you're saying, frankly, is impossible. And if you remember how the story goes, because we looked at this with Andrew sees with eyes of faith. And he says, "Well, I have stolen this little boy's lunch." There's a way to tell that story better, which is the boys generously gives it, but I like it better told as though he's stealing it. Okay, so we see immediately a practical way of seeing the world. Next story where Philip shows himself to be so practical is in John chapter 12. John chapter 12, Jesus has already announced he's headed to the cross. And while they're going along and John is describing how the move of the Gospel of John is moving toward the cross. It's a big turn in John chapter 12. the wrong people show up inquiring of Jesus. This is John chapter 12, verse 20. It says, now there were some Greeks among those who went to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. So somehow Philip's just closest to them. Some commentators argue that they may have chosen Philip, hearing his name, which has a Greek derivation. So they, as Greeks, were like, here's a guy we can probably talk to. They corner Philip and say, hey, we'd like to go see Jesus. Now, this is somewhat controversial because they weren't quite sure what to do with those who were not the Hebraic Jews, but also not necessarily the Grecian Jews. They weren't sure what to do with them at this point. And so it's possible that Philip kind of gets hit with this because he seems like the weak link in the group, that maybe I can get an angle towards Jesus. And Philip does what, again, most commentators would see as consistent with the way he behaved in John 6, which is he doesn't have the guts to go to Jesus. Instead, he goes to Andrew and says, I'm not sure what to do. This is outside the protocol. There's a plan, there's a protocol, there's a way things are supposed to work. There's a process by which people get to Jesus. And you'd be surprised, actually, when you read the Gospels, how much of the work of the disciples is crowd control. A lot of what they're doing, they're effectively bodyguards outside the club for a lot of the Gospels. And so this is another one of those moments. They probably developed, you're Christians, you don't even know what that is. There's places people go dance and drink called clubs. And there's, anyway, so ask your pagan friends later. But he's nervous, like this is outside the protocol. This is not the plan. This is not the way this is supposed to work, and I'm not entirely sure that you're the kind of people that are even supposed to get through. Let me go ask Andrew, as though Andrew knows. And then Andrew says, come on, let's just go take him to Jesus. And again, this fits the model of Andrew, which is Andrew has an ability to see people in a particular way. He notices people that God is doing something with, and he prioritizes them. He's really good at noticing folks. That's what we notice all through Andrew's story and his life, actually all the way to his death. Okay, so again, here we are. And Jesus' reply, I think, is really interesting. It says, Philip went to tell Andrew. Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. Jesus replied. So what's happening here is John is tying Philip's hesitancy and Andrew's hesitancy to the next thing he's about to say. Listen to what he says. He says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant will also be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Jesus turns and says almost instantly, the only way that you can live a life with me is if you're prepared to surrender everything and trust me. It's a little bit of a stretch from the text, though John does connect it. But there's something in the hesitancy of these two guys that Jesus addresses directly by saying, somewhere in here you're going to have to just trust me. Somewhere in here, when your plans run out, you're going to have to be willing to give it all for me. Somewhere in here, you're going to have to just fully surrender. At some point, you don't get to be in charge of how this works. And you trust me at some point. And my soul is troubled within me. Should I escape this moment for myself? No, but the truth is, since I'm not going to escape it, you're not going to escape it. And somewhere in here, at some point, you're going to have to just yield everything. An early church father, Clement of Alexandria, when teaching, at least from how he had been taught, when teaching on the one parable where Jesus talks about the servants that go out and invite people to a party, and different people have excuses for not going to the party. Do you know this parable? One says, I have a field I have to go see. One says, I have this other thing I have to do, and they're distracted. When Clement's teaching that text, he does a very strange thing in the first centuries of the church. He actually says, this story, this parable is derived from a conversation with Philip. He just refers to it directly. And that this parable is actually derived from the people he knew that knew the early apostles. He says that Philip was always the one who was too practical and unwilling to respond. He just says it like offhandedly. Now, do we know that is that in the Bible? No. Do we know that that's directly related to Philip? No. But it is interesting. It seems to fit a trend that the way that Philip shows up in the Gospels seemed to be the way people understood him, as a guy who was fairly hesitant. I mean, have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt like, this doesn't add up. I don't know that I can trust the next step. Like, I know that the scriptures are super clear, that the first tenth of everything that I am given is the low water mark of generosity back to God. It's called a tithe. The first 10% of the money I get, I give to the work of God. That runs all through the Old Testament. It's reaffirmed by Jesus in the New Testament. I know that's true. That's true. But have you ever had a moment financially where it doesn't feel practical? Like, given all the difficult things that are happening in your world financially, I don't have 10% to spare. Now, the truth is you do have 10% to spare because you're supposed to give the first 10%. So you always have the first. So you're supposed to give the first part first, and then you spend the rest. But that doesn't seem practical, does it? I mean, if we went around and polled this whole room right now and said, do you have an extra 10% to give away? Anyone here like, oh yeah, Jay, I'm so glad I came to church today. I've been wondering, what do I do with this extra money? And I'm so happy that I came today because you've solved my problems. Thank you. Man, people say church isn't practical. This is so practical. No, nobody believes that. By the way, it doesn't matter how much money you make, you never have enough. You never have the 10%. I mean, there's a whole bunch of you that are making way more money than you did 10 years ago, and guess what? You still have no money. So there's something that's not practical about generosity. There's something that's not practical about prayer. There's something that's not practical about loving people who hate you. There's something that's not practical about forgiving. There's nothing practical about these things. It doesn't seem practical to trust your life to God. I mean, wouldn't God want you to just organize and run your life effectively? And that's what he wants, right? No, he doesn't. He actually wants your life. He wants you to trust your life to him. That's what he wants. So, I don't know. I mean, we can be hard on Philip, but there's a little bit of Philip in all of us. There's a little bit in Philip when it comes to our relationships, or who we date, or who we marry, or what job we take. What's practical? How does the balance sheet work? And yet at some point, Jesus comes along and says, I'm asking for it all. John 14, the passage that we read a moment ago, that Annabeth read for us, is, of course, the Last Supper discourse. And it's in that discourse that Philip asks the practical question at the table. Jesus says, I'm going away. And he says, oh, that's great. Here's all you got to do. Just show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us. Just make this really tangible, and we can stop all this discussion. And Jesus responds with, I've done that over and over and over again. All I do is show you who God is. And yet you just asked me for one more thing, and I'll trust you. Okay, who's this? Well, sorry, one more. The hardest challenge in discipleship, I mean, the most difficult moment in discipleship is the next one. Like, it's worth asking yourself right now, Where am I allowing my practicality to get in the way of what God asked me for by way of faith? Is God asking me to forgive? Is God asking me to be generous? Is God asking me into a new life of prayer? And I'm just like, I'm just so busy. I'm so busy. How could I ever pray? I'm so busy. The kids' sports league. It's a lot. How could anyone be committed to Jesus with soccer? How could it be done? I mean, this is not doable. Like, do you not understand how hard my life is? Jay, I have a field. How can I respond to the kingdom? And somewhere in here, Jesus over and over says, I've showed you, and I've showed you again. Philip's life is fascinating. He goes through all of these challenges, but yet stays faithful to Jesus. The last time we see Philip described directly in the New Testament is at the outpouring of Acts chapter 2. As a side note, there's other Philips in the New Testament. This is the hardest part about reading the Bible because it's true, which means there's people who have the same names. Like when we talked about, like Salome, who might have been called Mary. There's like 7 Marys in the New Testament. It's like, ugh. Which Mary are we talking about here? Or, there's a lot of Jameses, as we've talked about, and this is also true for Philip. There's at least 2 Philips. There's Philip the evangelist as well as Philip the apostle. So when you read, for example, in Acts 6 about Philip, that's unlikely to be this Philip. The Philip that goes down the road for the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts is not this Philip. They're 2 different Philips. And yet, in church history, they start transposing them, so it's really, really hard. But anyway, that was for the 3 geeks that care. I mean, there's literally 3 of you are like, this is very interesting. The rest of you are like, okay, whatever. But what we can see from church history is Philip actually goes all through Syria and different parts of Macedonia, and he ends up in southwest Turkey, where one guy comes to Christ and has a fairly wealthy business, and that guy comes to Christ, and it creates a bit of an uproar because he's sort of influential in the city. And at this point, Philip is traveling with Nathaniel, also called Bartholomew, as we looked at last week. And as he leads this guy to Christ, he creates a bit of a problem because the main temple in the town was a temple to a serpent. So it was a serpent god that they worshipped. And so both Philip and Bartholomew get the great idea that we should just pray that God kills the serpent. Just notice how he went from Mr. Practical to let's pray for the death of gods. Something happened to him is my point. And anyway, so they pray, and they go into the temple, and they stand, this serpent apparently would bite lots of people, and they stand with this serpent, and they pray over the serpent, and the serpent dies. And so the proconsul of the city is very upset about this because he's led a wealthy person to Christ, plus now their god was just killed. So they crucify Philip upside down outside of the temple, and they tie Bartholomew to the wall to hang him to die because they apparently didn't have enough supplies to also crucify him. They both start singing hymns and praying, and the story from the early church says that there was an earthquake, and a few of the people there that were there to execute them fall into a portion of the earth and die in front of them. And so the town freaks out and is like, oh no, what have we done? And they take Philip off the cross and they take Bartholomew off the wall, but Philip had already suffered too many injuries and he dies on the spot. And Nathaniel goes on and continues to do ministry. So not many people get to say they survived a form of crucifixion, but Nathaniel was one of them, according to this story anyway. So we have Mr. Practical, who's like doing calculations of like lunch money, turns into the bold evangelist who walks in and strikes a serpent dead. By the way, there is no way I can hear this story without thinking about Conan the Barbarian. Moving on. So I just had to get it out. It's just circulating in my mind. Okay, it's gone now. Something changed in Philip. Something changed where he learned to surrender. Something changed where he was the guy that sought miracles. By the way, there's about 24 stories of Philip healing the sick in the early church. He was one of the prolific ministers in power and healing. By the way, his saint's day, if you're Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, was just this past week. And on his saint's day, they read the stories of his miracles. Blind people seeing, dead people raising, apparently snakes dying. It's a miracle, I suppose. Something in his surrender, and I think on this day, Pentecost Sunday, it's worth asking the practical brothers and sisters in our midst to maybe put your pencil down. At some point, you have to stop running the calculations. At some point, you say, take my whole life, consume me like a fire. At some point, you say, I'll take the step that doesn't make sense. I'll make the generous move. I will surrender to the mercy of Jesus. For some of you here, today's your day to just say yes to Jesus. Just surrender. It's not another equation to solve. It's a person to fall in love with. A wind that can carry you. A water that can cleanse you. A fire that can consume you. This is the life that's offered in Jesus. And we'd be remiss if on this Pentecost Sunday we didn't say there's a little Philip in all of us. There's a few places where we calculate where we just need to trust. There's places where we have negotiated and it's time to just yield because he has shown us who he is over and over again. So maybe we can try that now. What do you say? Why don't we stand together?